Welcome, everyone. I'm Ariel from Appfigures, and I have Randy with me. We just released a brand new industry report about the streaming industry, specifically video streaming. It exploded over the last few years, and we have all the data. So we put together a 30+ page report, and you can read it if you want to. The link is in the description. It's free for everyone to download. We're going to take you through this report and give you our thoughts. We open up with a bunch of numbers, and they're really interesting numbers. 144 million downloads. $2.1 billion spent, 1.4 thousand spent per 1,000 people. That's a lot of money. And video streaming apps are making about 52% of the revenue of the entire entertainment category. That actually has TikTok, and TikTok is one of the highest earning apps in the universe. So how do you feel about streaming, Grandy?
There's just been this battle going on, it seems like since 2020, where every major player is looking in some way to have an app. There's been huge launches, huge arrivals on the scene, and it's a really fascinating topic for me as well.
We start by talking about the mobile download index and the mobile revenue index in the report. And for those of you who don't know, the mobile download index and the mobile revenue index take a category and show you how it changed over time without having to care about the actual absolute numbers that are probably big and really hard to keep track of. When we look at the mobile revenue index for the entertainment category in the App Store, specifically in the US, it's at 716. And 716 means that it grew more than 700%. Mobile downloads, 112. So downloads are not growing. Revenue has just exploded. And that's a trend we see kind of across the entire industry of apps. It's not something that's new, but it's amazing to see it happening with video streaming apps. Now, in the report, Randy, you wanted to compare categories. You have health and fitness, and music and audio, and a few others. How do you
Yeah.
see that growth changing over time?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different ways we can look at that. Obviously, it's changing growth in terms of downloads, or slash, as we might call it, adoption of the apps. It's also changing, as I think we've already made pretty clear, in terms of revenue. But taking those categories that are in competition for same amount of money in everybody's wallets, right? You've got, things like, health and fitness for workouts, or music and audio for, audio streaming, or photography or social, that these are like these core activities that folks are doing on their devices. And then what basically you see is we went, back to like 2019 to be able to show kind of where things were then, and, a lot of them either didn't grow or actually declined some. And entertainment actually declined some as well, kind of over that starting point.
In terms of downloads.
Yeah, in terms of
Yep.
downloads. And I think the index really, kind of already showed that. That there's been that either flattening out, or declining. But then, when we get into revenue, I mean, that is the really eye-opening chart. And like you said earlier, some of this is, has to be attributed to the fact that TikTok is housed for their own purposes in the entertainment category and not social. Um, but that's an app that I think if you've read anything, in This Week in Apps and the newsletter, that's something that's been growing and growing and growing over time. But it's not the sole contributor to all of this. 52% nowadays at this point in time of the revenue in that category comes from these streaming apps. And so it's really surprised me, that the chart that, we're looking at on page 8 of, the growth of that entertainment revenue versus these others. It's really surprised me because at the time of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk. There was no commute going on. There was, no real instances for people to be engaging with, television or movie content on their phones. Everyone was talking about, well, it's all going to move back to televisions because that's the nicest, biggest screen in the house. No, that's not how it went. And the data shows it. The data shows that despite, all those kind of forces and pressures pushing on mobile streaming, people want to watch people want to watch this content on their mobile devices, whether their tablets or phones. And that's what, really gets kind of borne out in this, is that sort of growth.
And I mean, we're looking at crazy numbers. The industry started, or the collection of apps that we got for this report started, like a 500,000 back in Q1 of 2019. So about a quarter of the revenue that it's doing now. And it just ballooned over the last few years. Just amazing, kind of blowing through really anything else. Photography, which is making a lot more money now than it did before, didn't grow nearly as much. Music and audio didn't grow nearly as much. They did in terms of percentage, maybe, but in terms of absolute revenue, they didn't. So I tweeted this and I said, this could potentially be the end of cable. And I don't think cable is going anywhere because it's been rooted in our lives for so long, but it lost money in the last few years, and video streaming has gained money, has made more money. So I think cable TV is going to die to this.
The other fact that to kind of include here as well is starting your subscription on mobile. It's not that just mobile is kind of a secondary thought or an afterthought. These are consumers that are actually deciding to subscribe to these platforms through their phone or their tablet, not through computer, web, not through the web, not through smart TV. It's being done through these smaller devices.
It's very true. And you know what it is? I think that's actually a positive because it's so much easier to use an iPhone or an Android, a small device, to subscribe to these things because you don't have a lot going on. If you go on a website these days, just so much going on. There are ads and there are banners and there are just big pages. Whereas on the phone, there's like one button and one graphic. And do you want it? Yes or no? And it's a lot easier to get to a yes than to distract someone with a lot more stuff on the screen. But something that's interesting and really talks about this point is the amount of money people are spending when we look at them as a group. So the amount of money people are spending per 1,000 people. You added this to the report, Randy. Why is this so important?
It's a way of comparing these geographies that are fairly, obviously diverse in terms of their content that they're consuming. They're diverse in terms of how much of it is being consumed on Android versus iOS. And there's just a lot of differences. But this was a way to kind of take the population, to take the populace, and average out the spend, per 1,000 people, so that we could kind of more or less compare apples to apples. Just starting kind of with what's in the report, with the downloads. It's just going to kind of transfer over to the revenue portion as well. We'll look at in a sec. But what we really see over the past few years is that North America and LATAM markets have adoption of streaming apps, according to the data, has really grown. And it has really grown, and there's a couple of factors in American markets. There's increased spending power of the populace there, but also a lot of these streamings are, it's something we didn't talk about yet, but there have been several streaming services that have launched, a handful that are fairly significant, that launched like right after the COVID onset, right? So just in the past few years, you have Max, getting to Max, but then also like Disney Plus and Peacock and Paramount, like it's been a really dynamic space. And a lot of those, they're getting off the ground in North America, and they do a lot of work in Latin America in terms of operating their services there as well. So I think what we're seeing, in terms of the downloads really being directed towards Latin America and North America is really showing those two things: new services launching that haven't spread internationally yet, but then also the increase in spending power. And then
That's true.
when so spending power, we actually like move on from the downloads per thousand people, and we move over into spend per thousand people over time. I think that we're seeing so many factors at play, and the fact that North America is just pulling away from everywhere else. And I
Yeah.
think that really goes back to what I just said about these new services launching.
Hmm.
But it's not just new services launching. Services like Hulu that were already in operation have grown. So it's not just, oh, here's 4 years of new launches and new platforms, and that is responsible for everything. It's
Hmm.
not like, no, there's more to spend in, and people are spending more. It's not like they're just dividing what they're spending before, and
Yeah.
we're not seeing any growth.
It's very true. I think it's a combination of so many things. Disney Plus pre-pandemic was barely in the US. started growing, eventually got out to Europe, and then eventually Latin America. And we can definitely see that in the chart when we look at the revenue growth over time, spent per 1,000 people by continent. We can definitely see that EU started growing, what is it, 2022-ish, end of 2021, beginning of 2022. And it makes sense, it kind of aligns. The US is also growing, but really almost all of these are growing in some positive direction. And if you look at the trends, they're not very far off. So by absolute value, they're definitely far off, but not by absolute value. If you just look at the shape of these charts, they're kind of heading in the same direction. Latin America is really behind everyone else. But even in EMEA, we're seeing growth. Even in EU, we're seeing more growth. And in the US and North America, we see so much growth. And that's because Peacock is only in the US, Paramount Plus only in the US, and they're bringing in a lot of money. But the interesting thing to me is that because video and streaming rights are now so complicated, it's probably really hard to take. Even Netflix had these same issues. And if you travel outside the US with your Netflix account, you're going to know that you can't stream some movies if you're outside of the US. If you're in a hotel in Spain, you may have different access to what you have here in the US, in New York, which I find to be just absurd, but it's complicated. I assume someone wants it to be complicated. I think eventually someone will figure it out. And then whoever figures it out first is going to be, I think, the first one to get to the point where now revenue is going up kind of across the board, thanks to these barriers that don't need to exist, no longer existing. And when we look at the downloads over time and consumer spending, we have a chart that looks at them as part of the category. We can see that ultimately it's kind of like spending and even downloads, or well, we see it more with spending. People are continuing to spend. So money is flowing into the App Store, into Google Play, into apps. And the balance between entertainment being video streaming or something else is still kind of maintained. So while the video streamers are making a good share of the money, there's more money to be had. So if you bring more content outside of the US into, Peacock Germany, if that's a real thing that's going to happen, or Peacock Europe, I think they're going to make more money, and then everyone else is going to go along with it. So not only what we're seeing now is kind of great, and the trend, especially here in the US, is extremely positive, but also this trend is not stopping anytime soon. And because of that, it makes a lot of sense that competition wouldn't stop anytime soon. And competition really benefits us. If you remember the pandemic days where I think every week we had a major title dropping exclusively on one of these apps. And I kind of miss those days. I feel like there haven't been many good movies out in general, not in theaters, not in streaming apps. I hope we get back to that soon. But speaking of the competition, we ranked all of the video streaming apps by downloads in Q1 and also by revenue, both in the US and outside the US. And those charts are very different. And that goes exactly to what we're just saying. Can you believe Netflix is still the most downloaded video streaming app in the world? Because I couldn't. I kind of forgot that Netflix existed, even though I watch movies on Netflix.
It's so, has so permeated the culture and so permeated the realm of mobile apps, et cetera. It just feels like it's on every device already, but that's not it's not the truth,
Yeah,
as as it turns
it
out,
feels like it.
because
That's true.
these. Yeah, for sure, and, we've always had it on our devices, or what
Hmm.
have you, but, I think it, a good thing, to kind of, take away from this also is to talk about, for example, how, our downloads estimates work. These aren't just, the same person. It's not just Ariel re-downloading deleting and re-downloading the Netflix app, over and over again to, make it number one,
Which I
which I don't
definitely
think
do,
you're trying
clearly.
to do. You d But
Yeah,
it
all the
doesn't
time.
work because because they're just counting that first, install
Hmm.
of the app for an account,
It's a
and
good
so
point.
that puts it in, more perspective because these are either new users of Netflix in general, or they're new users of the Netflix app. But either way, no matter how you look at it, it's really positive for Netflix. And I agree with you, Ariel. It's really surprising that it is still, especially with apps that are really you know doing a lot to grow, like Max and Amazon Prime
Okay.
or Prime Video. Um, it still surprises me.
I mean, you bring up Amazon Prime Video, and Amazon Prime Video is the second most downloaded app on our list globally. And to me, that was also surprising because I've been following Amazon Prime Video for a long time, and for a very long time, it did absolutely nothing. It just had an app, and it existed, and it was kind of buggy, and it didn't look good, and it felt like a terribly non-native app where you would click something, then wait a little bit, and something might happen. The titles weren't all that great, but it kind of somehow over the last few years has matured into a competitor, and it's making money and getting downloads. I mean, it's the second most downloaded app in the world right now, and you can say everyone has Amazon and Amazon is pushing it, but okay, great. Well done, Amazon, for building this distribution channel.
The content on Amazon Prime Video in the early days, I mean, it was just aggregated content, licensed content from other services, other channels, what have you. And, eventually Amazon followed the, HBO and Netflix route with original content. And, you know, I don't know if folks were expecting it, but Amazon actually released some really great content that got, rave reviews, won awards, and I think, that has to really be considered as a big factor in their growth there.
I find Max to be one of the most intriguing apps currently for streaming. Now they're
Mm.
the third most downloaded app in the world, and they are available internationally, but I don't know if they're available in as many countries as some of the other streamers on this list. But they're pushing really hard. And it's HBO, so the content there is a different kind of content, it's a different level of content. But like all the other apps, I feel like there hasn't been that much new and exclusive and exciting stuff. I don't even remember what was the
No.
biggest drop on Max recently. Yet it's still the third most downloaded app in the world.
Yeah, they've done well, but also I think been fortunate in that, even if they're currently kind of coasting with like one major tentpole production, they've got House of Dragons on Max, right, which has got a lot of attention because it's not bad. Some might like it better than the original Game of Thrones, but that kind of going what you said, it's fewer and further between that they're having these, kind of tentpole launches. But the ones that are launching, out of Max and out of Prime Video especially are just really good.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also ultimately that's why anyone would pay them at this point. And Disney is fifth on this list, but Disney might be the fifth in terms of downloads. It's the first in terms of revenue, and by a mile and a half. So that's
Mhm.
kind of crazy. And we saw this when we started talking about the indices, the mobile download index and the mobile revenue index. Fewer downloads, more money. That's because everyone is paying a subscription these days and everyone's comfortable with it. But also because companies are doing a good job getting that download to turn into a subscription. And Disney has so much content that is more of a need if you have kids, especially, or if you're a big Disney fan. And I think every other app on this list, with one exception, is more of a want versus a need. It's wild, the difference between Disney at more than $400 million in Q1 versus Max, which came in second at barely
Mhm.
300. That's a huge difference. Both of these apps are available internationally.
Disney Plus, I think they made a push kind of early on to expand to, Europe and just basically to LATAM and all these other countries. And so that, is partly to thank, I think, for, the overall like profitability of the actual subscriptions. But if anything, if Max is available in fewer markets than Disney Plus, I believe it is, still. The fact that it's making two
Yeah,
thirds or so
it's a
of
very
the same
valid
revenue
point.
as
It's
Disney
getting
Plus
close.
is, yeah, and yeah, there's a lot to talk about here, especially with things like Max, Paramount Plus, Peacock. They pulled in Discovery and they pulled in HBO and they pulled in Cartoon Network or whatever, Turner, and all these things. They've also been navigating that whole thing, that the conglomeration of media.
Well, the next one on the list is actually the extreme opposite, and that's Crunchyroll. And for those of you who don't know Crunchyroll, that's an app dedicated to streaming anime. I didn't know anything about anime up until a few years ago, and I didn't know that it had such a huge following. We're estimating almost $150 million in Q1 just from the app. It's just wild for something so niche, so specific. And that goes back to the point of people are just, they're looking for content, their wallets are open, they will pay. And that's why these trends are just going to get even bigger. And then we drop one below and we have Peacock. And so that's crazy. Peacock, which has a ton of content, only available in the US, which I think is probably the limiting factor, but it's less than Crunchyroll. Hulu, which is also gives you a ton of different types of content, is even less than Peacock. Very interesting to see that there is demand. The demand is there. You just have to give them what they want.
These particular charts, when we're looking at worldwide, we also have to say, these are kind of normalized to the App Store as well. So it's not like we're seeing any kind of, you know, one app is like really really popular with Android users versus iOS users, and that's kind of makes it blow up on here. It's no, this is we're looking at a single platform for the purposes of worldwide comparison. So yeah, I mean, this is pretty much how it has played out in the most recent quarters.
If we switch to the US only, Mac just
Uh-huh.
dominates pretty much everything. And that's exactly what I expected. I expected it to be
Yeah.
number one in revenue and number one in downloads. I think it's what we see when we look at the top charts. It's what we see when we do our most downloaded and our highest earning charts every month. It knows how to convert downloads into money. Disney is number two in terms of revenue, Netflix number two in terms of downloads. Both of these names that were kind of starring on the world stage are not growing nearly as fast, and they've been around. So it's not like Max is new and Max is just somehow growing a little bit faster. It's actually earning more money.
It's earning more money, and it's doing so. We just said, it's not like there's a lot of different, tentpole productions that are going on at Max, compared to some of these others like Netflix or Prime Video. But they're doing a great job of converting those, people who download it as the number one downloaded app, those people converting them into subscribers through the app.
And I think that's going to be a trend that we'll see more and more apps doing. It has to happen because the downloads are starting to slow down. Not starting, they've been sloping down for a long time. Every user that you can get your app into their phone is really worth a ton. And it's not going to be easy. So if you work so hard to get a download, whether it's by paid ads or word of mouth or drop the big title or really anything else, App Store optimization, ultimately you want to do the most you can with that user before they disappear. And if they do, they're gone. You collected all the highest earning apps, the most downloaded apps, and you did it by countries. Is there anything interesting that you want to talk about from that?
Yeah, I thought, for the purposes again of sort of showing the kind of penetration of streaming video and it's like domination. When we look at the charts in this report that, we've got Brazil, France, India, Japan, South Korea, United Kingdom, all major markets for streaming, but also just growing markets. Brazil is growing quite a bit. When you look at the entertainment category, once you kind of get outside of TikTok, you're seeing, these streaming apps. You're not seeing, any kind of other app that might be classified, as entertainment. That, really shows why they're making, I guess, the majority of revenue.
And that's also a good lesson, I think, to developers. If you're developing an app and maybe there's a better category to put your app or a different category, don't go with entertainment unless it's a video streaming app. You're never going to rank. Well, I was going to jump into the next chart, which to me is the easiest ways to understand what's happening. And that is our adoption versus consumer spending, where we look at downloads and we compare them to revenue as a change from Q1 of 2023 to Q1 of 2024. In the high adoption and high revenue quadrant, we have, of course, Max, of course, Disney Plus, but we now also have Peacock. Peacock moved from the high adoption but low revenue to the high adoption and high revenue because they've learned and now they know how to get more of those downloads to turn into revenue. And I think Peacock is following a really great strategy of tying themselves to live events. The Olympics have been on Peacock, and that's when they get to see their biggest spikes of revenue. And once you get someone to subscribe, it's less likely that they'll leave. Even if your churn rate is really high, it's not going to be everyone. And so you have to
Yeah.
find these reasons to get people to subscribe. And then once you have them, it's a lot easier to keep them. We see Hulu in the same boat, moving from the low revenue to the high revenue. And Hulu is an app I never hear anyone talk about. It's just kind of crazy. It's kind of a sleeper video streamer.
One of the things that, I think we can potentially consider with Hulu is that, because of these packages and these kind of team ups, whatever, between the streamers that are maybe owned by the same parent company, etc. You'd have, for example, you could subscribe to Hulu, but also subscribe to Disney Plus, and let's say it isn't here, but ESPN at the same time, but you're doing it through the Hulu app, so you're getting billed as the Hulu app. So there's a lot of nuance to what's going
Of
on
course,
behind the scenes.
I think the future is going to be cable, but in mobile. So instead of getting a subscription to Hulu separately from ESPN, separately from Disney, maybe even separately from other competitors like Peacock or Paramount or Max, we will find a solution that we'll pay more to, and that will give us access to all of them, but all will happen through the app. I don't know how long it will take until we get there, because again, rights and complexity and nuances, but I bet you we're going to get there.
Yeah, I think so. Apple, they were also for a time trying to see if they could offer a subscription package that basically included all the streamers.
I think we're not ready yet as consumers for this. We kind of just broke out of cable recently over the last few years. We need a few more years to feel the pain of now I need all these channels and all these subscription plans. And then I need to get an app that will remind me that I'm paying a subscription to all these video streamers and cancel them for me. That in a few years, that will become a necessity. One other thing that I see on this chart is Crunchyroll again. It didn't really cross any boundaries, so it's in the low adoption, low revenue category, but it's moved a lot closer to the high revenue category for this group. And this group is huge, which means if you're in the high revenue category for this group, you're making enough money for this to be serious. And they moved quite a bit. I think we're going to continue seeing more of this. And I think we're going to continue seeing more in general in terms of really specific, really niche content, making it into an app. Because if you think about it today, how easy would it be to go and set up a channel on cable TV for your very niche content? Obviously not easy. With an app, you can just get on there. So we'll definitely see more of this. Is there anything interesting that you see on this chart before we move on?
I think with the likes of, let's say, Disney Plus and Crunchyroll, and those others that Hulu and Peacock that crossed over. But I think like into high adoption, high revenue. I just think going back to Crunchyroll really quickly, it's moving, almost, completely horizontally through this quadrant chart from, you know, still having relatively low adoption, but like you said, if it crosses over into that high revenue, that should be looked at as a great example of how you take, a minimal base of downloads and convert to, Disney Plus level revenue. Not happening soon, you can kind of see this is only over, year over year actually. So it might be a while, but I could definitely see them crossing over there, in a few more quarters.
The next segment is about our discovery score and how we are scoring these apps based on how easy it is to find them in the App Store. And one of the main things that people think about when they think about streaming is I'm not going to download Max until I see an ad for it. I'm not going to download Disney Plus until I either hear from a friend that I need to get this movie or that I see an ad for it with something that I like. But that's absolutely false. That's kind of ridiculous in 2024 to think that people are not coming into the App Store or Google Play and are searching for just new content that they can get. And for someone like Crunchyroll with anime or all these other streamers that are more specific, that's the way to do it. Our discovery score looks at the number of keywords that apps appear in. So if I go into the App Store and I search for streaming video, if Peacock shows up there, that's a keyword that Peacock kind of owns. It looks at the rank of where they are, because if they're the first, they're more likely to get downloaded. If they're the sixth, they're not likely to get downloaded. And if they're 128th, they're not going to get downloaded from that keyword. And also looks at how important that keyword is, how popular that keyword is. So it's a really easy way to understand who's the biggest and the meanest and who's actually putting effort into this. And Peacock is number one. And I've said this for a long time now. Peacock is really trying. They're optimizing their keywords. They're looking at what trends exist, and they're trying to cater to all of them. Hulu does an okay job as well, more than okay, I should say. Max is trying. Disney is doing not an okay job, a poor job. Disney is not really targeting any keywords. This is the kind of thing that would take anyone with minimal knowledge 30 minutes to at least try. Paramount Plus is really in the same boat. For some reason, these two are not even trying. And you can see by their numbers, there are There's just so many opportunities that they're missing out on. But again, this is one of those trends that maybe in a year, everyone will realize that they have to spend money on organic discovery being found in the App Store, in Google Play. A lot of other apps have realized this and they're doing it and getting downloads. And we even looked at the number of keywords. And when it comes to the number of keywords, I was surprised to see Hulu is winning. But then I remembered that Hulu has been around for so long, and the algorithm, the search algorithm, learns over time. So you can find Hulu in thousands and thousands of keywords, more than 5,000 keywords. Peacock is number 2 with about 3,000 keywords. And then you have Disney
Yeah.
Plus, just about 1,000 and a little bit. You have Paramount with almost just barely grazing 1,000.
I think you told me something that just blew my mind about Paramount Plus, only being able to find it if you search Paramount Plus,
Yeah.
more or less, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good.
No, that's such a huge missed opportunity. And we see this, we
Yeah.
used to see this with a lot of these big brands where they considered the App Store to just be a place where someone will search for them by name, or they will drive traffic
Hmm.
through a paid ad from Google, from Facebook, from one of those other places,
Yep.
from Instagram. But there are so many downloads that don't start that way and start with a search. Apple says that most of the downloads on the App Store start as a search. I'm assuming we'll see more and more of these companies really spending the 30 minutes on App Store optimization. Now, the next one is, I know, something you've been really interested in. So I'm going to let you have all of it.
There have been some key moments, I think, over the past couple of years, and they're still developing, that we wanted to, be able to take the time to look at and to see, hey, look, like what is really going on here with these initiatives that are happening in the streaming world. So, one of the biggest kind of new directions for some of these streamers, in order to, as we're looking at grow that revenue per user, has been ad supported tiers. So, a cheaper subscription, but you get advertising. When we looked at, just new installs, like we've kind of taken both of these apps. It's Disney Plus and Netflix have both added ad supported tiers, and we kind of line those 2 points in time up. We see that there it doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of growth or much growth at all in terms of the amount of downloads that they're seeing. However, that then has us asking, okay, well, what else could be going on there? There are new users, but there's also a lot of existing users who are saying, you know, we don't necessarily need to pay the $14. We want to pay the 7 or whatever it is at this point, and we're fine with ads. So they might, and this isn't what Netflix wants at all, but they can be downgrading, because they don't really care if there's a free roll ad or what have you. But this is just one way to look at that, to say, hey, the start of this period, we looked at 17 months out, and didn't really see an impact, in the US when they added these ad-supported tiers.
If you think about Netflix from way back in the day, it was a lot cheaper than what it is now. That I think some people are just priced out of being able to use Netflix, and that's what happened over time. So I see the ad-supported tier as just a way to push against churn, and a way to keep some of these people around who can no longer afford Netflix because no one is grandfathered into these plans. They pushed out, in my opinion, so many people who didn't want to afford it for whatever reason, that they just needed a way to stop that sort of leak.
We're taking you back where you started, but we're putting in ads, and so that we're gonna still make revenue off of that.
Amazon Prime Video did that very sneakily a long time ago, because as they transitioned from just some licensed content to being a real streamer and making their own videos, I think they realized that they can't charge as much money. And they used to bundle it with a Prime subscription, and then they stopped bundling it. Then they give you a discount if you have a Prime membership. And they eventually also landed on the same thing, where we can keep the price low, not zero low, and not get that same level of churn if we just shove more ads. So it's not about just getting more people to download the app, which is what I expected it would be. It's more about getting people to either pay more or remain a paying subscriber and not going away, which is totally different than what I'd expected. If you like this report, this is so new for us. We'd love to hear your feedback. Drop us a comment below. Let us know what you think. And also, if you like this video, give us a like. And another interesting trend that also has Netflix and Disney in it is password sharing. We kind of knew this would be a big deal. We looked at demand after they introduced these. The results are interesting. What do you think about this, Randy?
Netflix and Disney Plus have made a lot of noise over the past couple of years about, hey, we're finally going to get serious about cracking down on password sharing through whatever technologies they've developed and so on. And so they kind of had a moment in time where they each said, okay, this is being implemented. Both of these trend lines, they're showing from the point that these crackdowns by the streamers began, and several months or several weeks out. So we go about 2 months out from there. And so what we see is that, like, initially, Disney Plus, their adoption, on week one of this crackdown, jumped by 27%, got as high as 31% more than the starting point. And then eventually, kind of tapered off. And then we saw that, Netflix, the crackdown, didn't really kind of pick up speed, for a couple of weeks. But over time, the new downloads did increase, similarly to Disney Plus, in the
Mm-hmm.
30 to high 30 percentile change. And so obviously the scary emails or whatever went out at the time really pushed enough folks to get their own subscriptions, right?
Yeah, but what's
And their
interesting
own.
to me is we would see this with revenue, and there's the reason why we're looking at downloads is because we wanted to see if there is additional adoption. Why are there more downloads if Netflix is saying you have to pay us more? That's what I don't get. So that my expectation was for that to not change the trend and be very similar to password to the ad supported tiers, or really the opposite. I thought the ad supported tier would get more downloads, whereas here they're limiting what you can do and they're getting more downloads. I think that's just insane.
That flies, in the face of, common wisdom, or really what you would expect for sure. And some of this as well. I mean, we're not saying that, these, folks have um never watched on mobile before, what have you. But if you're setting up, you have to set up and pay for your own new account on, let's say, on your smart TV or on your computer or whatever. You're also probably going to download the mobile app as your kind of on the go companion, right? So I think, though, that, yeah, looking at the downloads in this case can kind of, maybe give us a sense of what was going on in terms of uh folks that were getting their own subscriptions, needing to download the app, and so on.
And that's actually a really valid point because it means that this drew more people into the app. Or if you look at it just a little bit differently, we took people that have probably been around for long enough, maybe before the Netflix app was a real thing, or maybe before Disney Plus, the app was a real thing, maybe just in the beginning, and they got a password from a friend, and maybe they attached it to their Apple TV or or were just watching on their computer. And now, when they were presented with the need to subscribe on their own, the phone is just the best way to do it. Going back to what we were saying before, it's such an easy thing. Subscribing from the App Store is super simple. There's really not much to think about. And so that could explain this trend. And it's no longer that crazy to me that people are abandoning what they used to do before just so they can get it back. And they're managing all of that from their phones or from their iPads or from a mobile device. But I mean, look at these numbers, 30+%. And we're seeing kind of the same trend, just a little bit shifted across both. So they knew what they were doing when they decided to crack down on password sharing. The last trend on this list is something I expected not at all. It started back in November of last year, kind of like the end of last year, exploding this year. Short drama apps. They're making so much money. It's unbelievable.
Whoever came up with this concept, they thought they didn't really know about Quibi, so that didn't hold them back. And they thought, wait a second, people love soap operas. I mean, essentially, right? Maybe they want to watch a shorter version of a soap opera. And that's effectively, I mean, you've looked at some of the content too. It's not great, but it's these little bite-sized stories, and they're pretty over the some of them are pretty over the top.
Extremely
Um,
over the top. How do they have all these resources to make this? in what over just a few months went from absolutely nothing to making tens of millions of dollars every month, hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter. It's just mind-boggling.
This is one of those things where, we discovered it, and we were able to, kind of quantify what's going on there, and you can see it for yourself in the report. But this isn't something where we're getting any indication that it's trailing off. It'll be really interesting to see, where it goes, how long it can kind of sustain growth like this. um but I think we didn't. This is obviously video streaming, so we're not covering other categories in this report. But I have to look at the gaming category and the fact that some of the highest earning mobile games have been essentially this kind of content, only digital, only drawn by someone, or computer graphics or what have you. The different games that let you kind of live out a storyline from a soap opera. These aren't interactive like that, but it's the same. It's at the end of the day, it's similar content, and it's live action, and maybe it's even better for people because they don't have to interact with it.
But there's one interesting little thing about this that I find a little bit different, and maybe something that we're going to see more, where all of the other streamers that we looked at in this report all charge a subscription or ad supported with a subscription. These short drama apps charge by video, and they use their own currency, in-app currency, something that I don't think I've ever seen in a video streaming or in most apps in general. Something that is a lot more the kind of thing you would find in games. And even in games, it doesn't really correlate to what we're seeing here. But the idea here is that you buy a specific number of coins every time, you put them in your wallet, and then every video that you want to stream, or every short bite of video that you want to stream, costs a certain number of coins. And it's really smart because you give people the illusion that they are in control of how much they're paying you, even though they're not. They have to buy these credits or these coins or whatever in packages. And they have to buy things that really don't have any sort of real value. And it gives them the flexibility to change how much they charge per these videos once you have their in-app currency. And once you think in in-app currency, no one is going to divide, 10,000 coins or 75,000 coins that they bought for $15 into pennies. So you have no clue how much each video costs. That's just so powerful in something like this. And I suspect that a lot of this growth that we're seeing on the revenue side is because of this.
It's yet another way to make revenue on the app
Yeah,
store.
absolutely. I bet you will see more of this. Now, this was the last insight in this report. The report itself has a ton more data. We barely even skimmed the surface. All of the actual values that we talked about, all of the deeper insights are all in the report. If you want to take a look at this, check out the link in the description. It's available for free to anyone, so you can get it at any point. If you have any feedback for us, thoughts, what you like, what you didn't like, please drop them in the comments. That's where we'll sign off.